Good morning, everybody, and I want to say welcome to the Workforce, Labor, and Economic Development Finance Policy Committee. Today is April 8th. Oh, by the way, happy birthday. My dad's birthday today. He's turning 90 years old today, so Dad, if you hear me, see me, happy birthday, Dad. It's a big day. Yeah. He's going to hate that, by the way. Again, good morning, members. We've got a couple of things on our agenda today. We've got a presentation from DEED, also from the Office of Legislative Auditor as well. So looking forward to that. And I think Chair Pinto and I will talk a little bit later about where things are at. I did want to recognize that we have our nonpartisan not here today. And they are working right now very hard on our bill to try to present something to us all. We'll come back to that, I think, a little bit, if that's all right, Chair Pinto, or do you want to? Yeah, so we'll just want to give everybody an update on that, but we were working hard on that, so just want to say thanks for that, too. So, with that, members, I do see a quorum. We have minutes to pass from Thursday, April 3rd. Vice Chair Mecklin, have you had a chance to go through those minutes, and would you like to make a motion?
I have, and I move the minutes.
Thank you, Representative Mecklin. Seeing that the minutes of April 3rd have been moved, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Minutes are carried for April 3rd, 2025. So thank you and good morning, folks from DEED. If you would, again, please introduce yourself. We are going through a couple presentations. As I mentioned, members, you do have some handouts in your packet. I assume we'll have an overview as well. So, Mr. Majors, welcome, and please introduce yourself and proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Good morning. My name is Mark Majors. I'm the Deputy Commissioner for Workforce Development at DEED. I'm joined by my colleague, Devin Beaudry, Director of Government Relations at DEED. Today, we're going to provide you an overview, basically, of our grants administration.
Wonderful.
So, I just hit. Okay. So, coming out of FY 23-24, and just kind of a snapshot of our programs that we've administered and serviced over the last couple of years. We've actually administered over 30 competitive grant programs, and I'm highlighting programs, which total about $163 million over this period of time. In addition, we've also administered 136 direct appropriations totaling about $268 million during that time. In addition to these grants, DEED has also administered dozens of other economic and community development focused programs serving businesses, cities, counties, and et cetera, as well as broadband infrastructure. Some of DEED's responsibility. So just to be very clear, at DEED we take our responsibilities very seriously about being good stewards of the taxpayer dollars. The agency works very hard to strike an important balance of ensuring stringent financial oversight to protect taxpayer funds from fraud and mismanagement, while also at the same time of deploying funds in a timely manner in ways that the legislature has directed. When challenges have been identified from an organization operating in good faith, DEED and the staff look to work with that grantee to come up with, to bring them into compliance and to make sure they're in compliance with all our policies and procedures as well as OGM policies and procedures. Okay, grant administration at DEED. We're going to kind of walk you through a few of the slides of how we administer grants at DEED. So DEED, as I mentioned earlier, administers a wide variety of grant programs on both the economic development side as well as the workforce development side. They look slightly different depending on what the grant or the contract may look like. But you could be rest assured our oversight and controls of both competitive and indirect appropriations do mirror each other. So request for proposals. For competitive grants, DEED follows basically the statutory requirements that we received. In general, grants go out for about 45 days. And depending on what the grants are, and during, for instance, workforce development, which is the area I oversee, we actually may layer those out just to ensure that we're giving grantees the opportunity to actually apply to grants in a timely manner, but also giving them an opportunity so they're not overlapping and they have total access. The way RFPs do go out is basically through, through an email blast. Interagency and external stakeholder partners are encouraged to circulate the RFPs to their networks. And just a little bit in addition to that, prior to us releasing the RFPs, we generally will have kind of community engagement sessions to kind of talk about what is the purpose of the RFP and to make sure individuals understand why we're having these RFPs are going out and what the expectations are well before the RFP is issued. Okay. Conflict of interest review and prevention. State grant policy requires that procedures are in place to prevent individual and organizational conflicts of interest. DEED has additional conflict of interest requirements at the operational level. For example, at the time of contracting or if adding and changing any partners, DEED requires the grantee to fill out a compensated partners information form. The compensated information form asks grantees to disclose any actual, potential, or perceived conflict of interest with any subgrantee, contractor, vendor, or trainer to be compensated under the state grant funds. DEED also requires the grant reviewers certify that they do not have a conflict of interest before they begin reviewing grants. Community reviewers. So we've had the community reviewers, and I would say probably 7 or 8 years. I would say actually 9, excuse me. And the reason why we brought community reviewers into play was because it provided, thank you. It provided an opportunity to get a different perspective on the RFP reviews. And so what we have as a requirement is that at least 25% of the individuals reviewing the RFPs are community reviewers. I'm pleased to say that generally we go above that number to get more input from our community partners in that. We think it's more of an inclusive process and more impactful in our funding decisions. As grant review opportunities arise, DEED puts out an application to community reviewers and asks them for qualifications and why they're interested in participating in the actual grant review process. In addition to them going through that process, community reviews also have to sign off on a conflict of interest as well. They work approximately about 20 to 40 hours a week, and in most cases, we're right now at the space through foundation funding able to provide them a very nominal stipend to participate in the process. Keep reading that one. Okay. Pre-award risk assessments. So both on direct appropriations as well.
Commissioner, excuse me. I think you're skipping a page in between. I think we've got extra pages. I know that I've got community reviewers. I think you missed one before, and maybe, you missed the grant review one, which is fine. I just want to give you a heads up. So you're right. You're on pre-award risk assessment now. Thank you.
Okay.
I just want to make sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so pre-award risk assessment. So as you can see, there's a checklist of things that we do go through before an award is actually, a grant is executed. Before any direct appropriation or any competitive grant, a risk assessment is done. And the reason why we do it before, particularly in competitive grants, is we want to make sure we can ensure that that agency or entity can actually deliver the services in a fiscally sound way. So as you can see, it's a checklist. I don't want to bore you with all of them, but I know that they're important. First thing we do is we look at outstanding unemployment insurance debts, kind of skipping around. We make sure to complete their verification of tax inclusions. We check with the Secretary of State's website to make sure they're active, registered. And then we complete a review from DEED's finance director to determine risk level. And generally what we will do is we will categorize them as red, yellow, and green, and determine their risk level. If those agencies that kind of come in at a red, where we have to make a decision whether or not we're going to continue to fund them, whether they're going to fund them or not, if they seem to be new organizations, or we've seen something in the past that we need to kind of make sure that they're up in compliance, we will go out and review that grantee early. Ensure, like within the first quarter of the grant, to make sure they're tied to they're doing the work that's tied to what we're asking them to do. Okay. Steps to completing a grant agreement. As I talked about, we do the risk assessment. The grantees receive notice via email that the organization has been approved for the grant. We also do send out a letter to the organization and letting them know that they received the grant. At the same time, those organizations that were not successful in the process, we do send them a letter as well, and we do also give them an opportunity to understand, to ask questions as to why their grant may not have been successful. So, providing a little technical assistance for future opportunities for them. When grantees do start the process for actually entering their grant, they submit a work plan. Generally, a work plan is submitted with the RFP. However, usually those are changed as a result of, because of they may be asking for additional money, more money than we actually are allowed to allocate at the time. So we'll make that adjustment. And then finally, the state will be the last entity to sign off on any grant applications moving forward. Components of the grant agreement. Deed actually develops the terms of the grant agreement. Agreement covers a wide range of terms and responsibility that Deed and the grantee must follow. Deed does not make payments until the grant agreement is signed. And any work that the grantee does prior to the grant agreement being in place will not be reimbursed. And just to be really clear, a majority of Deed's grants are reimbursement grants. Speaking of reimbursements, grant payments are processed on a reimbursement basis. As I mentioned, Deed may allow cash advances in very, very limited circumstances, and those are generally in emergency situations. As grantees incur expenses for eligible work, they submit requests for payment to Deed. The teams review it. They match it up to make sure it's in line with the work plan and where they're supposed to be. If there are some questions about the request, the staff will reach out to that grantee to talk about and ask them questions about why there may be a disconnect before they move forward with the reimbursement situation. Grant progress reports. So OGM policy 08-09 requires grantees to submit written progress reports at least annually until all grant funds have been expended and all terms in the grant agreement have been met. Deed requires grantees to submit progress reports on a quarterly basis, so a little bit more stringent than OGM policy. A grant progress report summarizes the grant's activities and outcomes given during that period. A progress report may have a narrative, statistical, and financial elements. Information requested in the grant progress report may include, but is not limited to, goals and objectives, activities, outcomes, challenges, lessons learned, and financial information. So monitoring, I know it's everyone's favorite topic. So Deed conducts at least one on-site monitoring visit before a final payment of the state's grants over $50,000 or more, and it conducts at least an annual monitoring visit of grants over $250,000. The purpose of grant monitoring visits is to review and ensure progress against the grant's goals and address any problems or issues before the grant ends, essentially. An effective grant monitoring visit may cover topics including, but not limited to, statutory compliance, challenges faced by the grantee, modifications made during the grant period, program outcomes, grant policies and procedures, grantee governance and training, and technical assistance as needed. Deed also conducts financial reconciliation during those monitoring visits to review the expenditures at least once before the final payment is made. A final reconciliation involves reconciling a grantee's request for payment for a given period with supporting documentation to that request, such as purchase orders, receipts, and payroll records. When Deed identifies an organization as high risk, and kind of going back to my point earlier, staff conduct their monitoring visits early in the process to make sure that we are providing enough technical assistance to those organizations that we have identified as maybe being high risk. And grant closeout. Grantees must submit their final payment within 20 days to the end of the grant period. In addition to the final payment request, grantees must submit a final report on their project outcomes. The final report must summarize grant activities, outcomes for the entire period. DEED reviews the final payment request, reviews the final report, and conducts a closeout evaluation of performance and meeting objectives for the grant. Successful grantees receive closeout notice confirming the completion of the grant, and all documents will be placed in the grant file. It is the policy of the state of Minnesota to consider grant applicants' past performance before awarding subsequent grants for them or to them. And then I have concluded my presentation, and I am available for any questions that members may have.
And thank you, Deputy Commissioner. And I know that we've got another presentation from you with, and maybe that's, is it Devin, are you going to be doing that, or no, just the grants management? This is the same one then? Did I have two of them? The other one, that's this one, I thought.
That's the full report.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Okay. Thank you. Members, I kind of failed to mention, I felt like it was actually okay for this presentation to stop and ask any questions during the presentation, but now is that time. If anybody has any questions for the Commissioner? Oh, is there a list? Oh, thank you. Patty. I'm sorry, Representative Mueller.
Thank you, Chair Baker, and thank you for the presentation. I did have a couple of questions as I was going through your PowerPoint. I wanted to go back to the pre-award risk assessment checklist, which I guess these are not numbered, but that's the that's the title of the slide that I'm on. You talked about if DEED deems an organization high risk, special conditions are added to the grant agreement regarding early financial reconciliation. So I guess I wanted you to expound a little bit more about that process, about that means for them to be high risk. Is it the practice of DEED to then just give maybe a probationary approval, or do you add any remediation? Like maybe, let me put this two different ways. If a grantee has been rejected or has not been deemed appropriate, are they given remediation steps so they could maybe go back? Or if they are high risk, are we giving them any, hey, these are the things that we're going to be really looking at before we're able to see how you are using the money appropriately? Thank you,
Commissioner Majors.
Mr. Chair and member, generally, there was that laundry list of what the risk assessments, we go through the checklist, and we will go through that checklist for every application that comes in. There's some times where we may see a situation where they may have some questions around their unemployment insurance. They may have something, we're checking with the Secretary of State, and if we see something there, where we won't proceed if we're not able to check the box on those things. But we do give the applicant an opportunity to respond. So we will reach out to the applicant and say, hey, we've noticed that, for instance, your unemployment insurance, there seems to be some questions there. Can you provide us some backup information around that? Generally with high risk, and that may trigger us if it's, for instance, there's a delay or something like that. But we do not move forward unless we are able to do that checklist. When we see a new provider to our portfolio, they usually will fall into that high risk just because they're a new grantee to our portfolio. And so that doesn't necessarily mean they've done anything wrong or they're problematic. It just means that they're new to our portfolio, and we want to make sure that we are providing technical assistance in advance.
Representative Mueller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you. That was really good. I wanted to just see what some of other internal controls you had for some of those. The last question I have is you talked about how there were many different basically publications of how the grants have worked, how the provider and all of the applicants have done with their program, in that you publish some of these reports. Is that stuff, and maybe this is me being new to the committee, are those type of publications public so that anyone can go and look at them?
Commissioner.
And that's my last question, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, member, Yes, I mean, statutorily, we're required to publish reports that we are submitted, I don't know, every January, depending, either every year, depending on what it is, or every other year, which we're required to submit, and we do make those public.
All right, Representative, oh, sorry, go
Chair
ahead, Deb.
Baker, Representative Mueller. I guess what this
Please introduce
presentation-
yourself for the record.
Devin Bowdry, Government Relations Director.
Thanks.
This presentation didn't go to, particular to the workforce grants, is that statute 116L.98, which lists 16 different metrics on what workforce development programs need to report on as far as outcomes go. And that is public. That is a dashboard we have on our external website, and I'd be happy to circulate that link.
Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you. I have a question that may be a deed question, maybe a DLI question, but especially thinking about the broadband grants and the pre-risk assessment. I know Minnesota has a responsible contractor law that I think goes beyond the pre-risk assessments, that requires us to look back the last 3 years and see if there's been any labor violations, any unemployment insurance violations, any wage theft violations. Do you know if that's part of the pre-risk assessment? And do you know if the broadband grants specifically trigger the responsible contractor standard?
Commissioner or Mr. Chowdhury?
Chair Baker, Representative Greenman, I think that is a newer provision, and we just launched the list, I believe, in partnership with DLI, maybe in the last few weeks. So that will be something we look to ongoing with those broadband grants.
Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate that. I would say, actually, more broadly, and if folks are interested in this, I have a bill. Been thinking a lot about the responsible contractor standards, which says if we're going to give resources or financing, we want to make sure that folks are just complying in the last 3 years, don't have any citations from DLI, don't have any citations from DEED. It's not currently, I think, in our pre-risk assessment. I've sort of been asking the question of why. I think it's a grants management question, but extending that to all the ways that government spends money, to me, just seems common sense, partially because we want to make sure that when we are using public dollars, we're using them with folks who are complying with all of the parts of the law. And then this is a committee, a great committee to talk about that in, because we both have DLI and we have DEED. So I appreciate that. I wasn't sure in our pre-risk assessments right now whether that's incorporated, and especially I know broadband sort of intersects with construction in a way that some of the other grants don't, but would love to talk to you about it more, and also would love if DEED and DLI are talking about how we ensure that both of those pieces come in at the beginning, not the end. Thank you.
Representative Wayne Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have I don't know if we have time, but I have a number of questions. Can you start off by asking me, or can you define conflict of interest? What are the guidelines that you consider conflict of interest?
Who wants to take that one?
Well,
Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, Representative, I mean, I think, we look at the state policy's definition on conflict of interest. When we do look at those, the definition, we follow what the policy provides to us on that, so we would follow that. I think when we had on this slide here, kind of sets that out, gives you examples. For example, at the time of contracting, or if adding any changes, we require to make sure that an individual is not being compensated, that would create some kind of conflict. You could look at, and we could come back to you with a definition of that, or define that. Yeah, I would have to come back to you on that one.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Who determines whether there is a conflict of interest or not?
So at DEED, the document is submitted to our grants coordinator team, and they will review it. And they look at things, for instance, if it's a subgrantee and there may be a similar name, last name, surname, to someone on the grant. We actually ask them to certify that they don't have a conflict of interest. And at times, if there's a question to the team, we'll actually even do, in some cases, we'll even go and do a review through via internet just to kind of check and make sure there's kind of cross-check.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If, in the process of if there is a reason for a grant that you would not have, if you would not have given out the grant based on something that you found prior to it, and then you found that the reason for the grant should not have been given, do you ask and do you request that money back that was given out on that grant?
Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, member, yeah, if there seems to be a number of things can come up, but if for instance, if a grantee is not performing, we may go and actually seek to actually terminate that grant. If we find during the course of doing some monitoring that there may be some irregularities in that, there's a possibility that we could actually terminate the grant. I think everything is situational. There's not a one size fits all, because we also allow grantees, if we do have questions, an opportunity to kind of remedy whatever the issue may be. But if they're unable to do so, then we would move towards a termination.
Representative Johnson.
So would finding of conflict of an interest would be one of those reasons that you would be seeking the money back?
Commissioner.
Again, excuse me, Mr. Chair, a member. Again, I think it's going to be a situational scenario. We would have to see what that looks like. It wouldn't be appropriate to say blanketly, like if it was a conflict of interest. I'm not sure what that may be. It could be maybe someone's on the board and they're a grant, and they are the grandfather of one of the individuals working on the grant. Now we'd have to look and see what that would look like.
Just
How about one more final?
Thank you. What percentages of grants that you issue do you audit?
Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, member, audit or monitor?
Audit, just go back afterwards and see if the reports you were giving were correct, or if there's false information or anything like that, or is it once a grant is fully funded, you just move on and assume everything was good?
Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, member, again, we follow OGM policy where we do look at grants $50,000 or more and conduct a monitoring visit of them. And if they're $250,000 or more, we do an on-site annually. As I mentioned earlier, in addition, before we close out a grant, there's a couple things, excuse me. One is reimbursement grant. So that means that the grantee will have to submit information to us, an invoice to us, and we verify that in multiple ways. We'll look at, for instance, what we call our Workforce One system, which is our CRM, to see if there are individuals enrolled in the program, and does that invoice match up to what we're seeing in our system. I mentioned the quarterly progress reports. We also look at the quarterly progress reports along the way. And again, that's more stringent than the OGM policy, which says we only have to do it once a year. And then lastly, when we do a program closeout, we do require the grantee 20 days before the grant is closed out, or after, I should say, to submit not only their invoice, but also another kind of closeout package, so that we can determine whether or not we're going to issue final payment. So it's not just a one-time review. Now, question to your percentage of how many we do, it again depends if they're $50,000 or $250,000 grant as to what that drives us to the when we do our monitoring. But most grants are monitored because most of our grants are over $50,000.
Thank you. If
Representative
we have time,
Zale-
I have one more, but if we have time.
One final, go ahead.
Sorry. So, question, thank you, Chair. One of the questions in the audits, I guess, I was thinking not necessarily what receipts were given, but two questions. The success outcomes, who comes up with those outcomes? And then I guess my question is if you ever go back and see if the outcomes that were presented to you actually were the true outcomes.
Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, member, generally when we have I think you're going to, do we have goals for the state and our grants? And for our state-funded grants, we don't have necessarily goals, but we have measures that we look at, meaning that the grantees provide us with their measures that they're trying to achieve. In addition, and we look at that. So if they say they're going to enroll 100 people, then we check to make sure that they're enrolling 100 people. If they're providing training, 80 people, we look to see if they're training 80 people. Do we, and that's on all our state grants. And then in addition, as I think Mr. Baldry mentioned, is that we're required, I don't know, not sure how many fields, but through our Workforce One system, there's a number of fields a grantee has to fill out about their program.
Mr. Chaudhry?
Oh, yeah, I was going to add on to that. So the statute and the dashboard that I mentioned with the 16 different metrics, 2 of those deal with outcomes after a participant has exited the program. So there's tracking of wages 4 quarters after exit and then 8 quarters after exit. And to do that, we need Social Security numbers, but we are tracking wages, 2 years after a person leaves the program.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Representative Zalesnikar.
Thank you, Chair Baker, and thank you for the presentation. My question is going back to the question was asked on how many grants were terminated. And I guess my question is more specific as to, in the last 5 years, have there been any grants that you terminated because the conditions weren't being met, is my first question.
Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, member, that's something I have to go back and do a review on in the last 5 years, and we can get back to you on that.
Representative Zalesnikar.
Thank you, Chair Baker, and thank you for that. That would be great to have that data, if the scope. Just
Sure.
curious as to the scope of how many end up being terminated for not following through as deed requires. My second question is, you talked about some specifics on conflict of interest with familial relations. We talked about a grandfather. And so I guess my question is more about how do you look at the scope of government relations with the elected officials, elected representatives, and the scope of those who are staff resources to us as far as their association with the grantee? Is that part of your assessment process?
Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, member, again, I think that's, as I mentioned before, I think we would look at everything situational. I mean, with the facts that you just provided, I mean, certainly we would take a look at it, but I can't say definitively, like there's a full-on process on that, with that specific factual situation. But if that did come up and we did see it, we definitely take a look at it and work with our general counsel's office on that in terms of a conflict of interest, and then determine whatever the next steps are after that.
Chair Pinto.
Thank you, Chair, and really just, and thank you, Commissioner. Just following up on Representative Johnson's questions, I found the grant conflict of interest policy, and there's a form as well, and maybe it's something we can get out to members, just because I think that it may well help answer some of the questions that were being asked. So we'll get that, maybe possibly distribute, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner.
Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Majors. I'm going to start by asking a little bit of your process and how it applies, especially to folks who might be from either a smaller community or from a smaller nonprofit that could be in any corner of the state, and the challenges that they may have accessing grants, competitive grants, realizing that many of them either don't have huge salaries, don't have a lot of folks to run through competitive grant processes, and how you balance the difference between folks who have full-on hired divisions of their nonprofit to compete for competitive grants. How do you go about the work to ensure that there are smaller entities or smaller communities receiving the grants that you have?
Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, member, well, there's a number of ways we try to conduct outreach to talk about what the different grant opportunities are. One way is that, as I mentioned, if we have a database of thousands of grantees, that we do a blast out on what the RFPs are. In addition, there are times of the year, which I'm personally gearing up to do, which is to go around the state and talk about the grant opportunities that may be available. I kind of wait for the legislature to kind of finish this business so I can talk about what the grants may be available. In addition, we do talk to our other partners and ask them in the communities to talk about what the opportunities are through our local workforce development boards and through our other kind of not-for-profit associations or groups that come together. We make those announcements to make sure that we're getting the word out. And we're always open to other ideas.
Mr. Chair,
Baudry.
Representative Schultz, I also want to add in, for each RFP that goes out, we often do a webinar. And then part of helping DEED assess the grantee applications that come in is the community reviewer process. So that is open to all people across the state who apply to become community reviewers, and they help review, read, score the proposals that come in. So they might have a particular lens to a smaller nonprofit, or they may know of their work and can speak better to that as they read through the application.
Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just say that, the reason I bring this up is this is what I've heard in my community, right? In towns of less than 1,000 people, in communities where, frankly, they don't access state grants quite as often as my friend Representative Hussein in his community. But at the same time, the issue is the same no matter where we are in the state, right? If you're a smaller organization, it's not just knowing what grants are available. It's the ability when you, number one, are working other jobs, like your sole role isn't just to be applying and working your way through a competitive grant. You have an entirely separate job and you're trying to provide for your family. And so it's difficult to compete with those bigger organizations who have those people to do all that work. So I just want you to take that back and try to find ways to enhance that ability for smaller organizations and communities to have access to grants. But I kind of wanted to hone in on a different question and something that I think maybe we're going to get to in a report here a little bit later, but I'm not sure if the two of you are going to be at the desk at the time.
Representative Schultz, we're going to ask that DEED does stick around if they want to after the report, if there was further up questions, but go ahead and feel free to answer it if you want to now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm just looking at this OLA report here for 2025, and especially looking at pages 18 through 20, and talking about the measurements and the performance goals and what is required. And I think when I look at both this session and potentially what we need to do next session is kind of addressing this need that we have, especially as we potentially are moving towards more competitive grants, to truly know the impact of the work that we're doing. And I wanted to see today if you had specific recommendations as to how we can enhance, either in law or in what you are going to ask of grant recipients, to show their metrics based upon what we have received here from the OLA, and just provide that to you.
And again, Commissioner, go ahead. We do plan on hearing from the OLA in a few minutes. If you want to answer that at that point or now, go ahead.
Sure.
Mr. Baudry.
Chair Baker, Representative Schultz, hope I'm not stealing OLA's thunder a little bit here, but the difference, there's plenty of metrics that organizations show, and I think the OLA report said we need to build on those metrics to have goals. And I think we want to have a much longer and more thoughtful and thorough conversation with you all, with the providers on what those goals should be, because the goals could maybe look different depending on the types of populations that particular organizations serve. Like if you're serving youth, that might be one set of goals. If you're serving folks who've come out of the carceral system, those goals might look different from, people who are just learning English. So there's going to be a wide variety of goals that we need to come up with, and we just want to be thoughtful about how those look and make sure that they're reflecting the actual work that these organizations are doing.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to the report if I could now. I don't have any other member questions. So again, I know you'll be sticking around if there's any other follow-up questions. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming in this morning. If I could ask the OLA team to maybe step forward, we'll have time to kind of come back to any other questions too. So also, the chair just wants to recognize the Minnesota House Page Program came in today. So I want to welcome to our Page volunteers this week. Thanks for being here. Hope you're enjoying your week while you're here. So just want to say hi to you guys. Good morning. Thanks for getting up so early too. This is great. You look good. And again, I just want to welcome the Office of Legislative Auditors here. Ms. Rodriguez is here, and when you're ready, you can introduce yourself. And Ms. Nada, if I got that right, Nada? So anyway, whenever you are ready, introduce yourself and proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. My name is Jody Munson Rodriguez. I'm the Deputy Legislative Auditor for OLA's Program Evaluation Division. And I just want to thank you for having us here today to talk about our latest evaluation of deeds grants management. When OLA comes before you, we often talk about compliance, whether agencies are ensuring that tax money is going to its intended beneficiaries. But equally as important is program performance, whether money is being spent in a way that achieves its policy goals. So in this report, we did look at both compliance and performance. As the Deputy Commissioner noted, DEED does manage numerous types of grants, so we had to focus in on a few different types. We looked at broadband development grants as well as certain workforce grants in this evaluation. And we found kind of a stark difference in trying to look at the performance of each of those. Evaluating performance of broadband grants was pretty straightforward. The legislature had established certain goals for broadband in statute. But for workforce grants, it was less straightforward. Neither the legislature nor DEED had established clear goals for the overall program. So it was difficult to measure what success would look like for some of those programs. We also saw some opportunities for DEED to more actively manage some of the grants that we looked at to help ensure their success. So to talk about some of those issues, I'm going to turn it over to the Program Evaluation Manager, Mariam Nada.
Welcome. Please introduce yourself and proceed.
Thank you, Chair and members. For the record, my name is Mariam Nada. I'm with the Office of the Legislative Auditor, and I was the manager for this evaluation. Before I begin, I'd also like to introduce our team, who is sitting here with me today as well, Ms. Gretchen Becker, Eleanor Berry, and Hannah Garasu. I'd also like to thank the staff of Department of Employment and Economic Development for their assistance throughout our evaluation. As Ms. Munson Rodriguez mentioned, for the purposes of our evaluation, we looked at some specific grant programs. While DEED manages a number of state-funded programs, grant programs, we looked at workforce grants and as well as broadband grants. The workforce grants, oh, it's not moving. Excuse us, we're having a little bit of, sorry, a little bit of technical. Not really sure what. Go down to the one on the right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe that we're going to go ahead and ask you to take a look at the slides in your packets.
So this
Thank
is-
you.
We're ready for that. Thank you. Thank you once again, Riley. What a good guy. Thank you.
All right. So the workforce grants we reviewed include select competitive and legislatively named grants aimed at providing employment and training services for Minnesota adults. The broadband grants we reviewed are intended to support the expansion of broadband service in areas where broadband service is not available or does not meet certain speed thresholds. And for these programs, we look specifically at grant performance as well as compliance with state grants management requirements. So I'll start off by highlighting some of our key findings before providing more additional context. First, statutes require DEED to report on certain performance metrics for its workforce grants, including some of the workforce grants we reviewed. However, as I will explain in more details, we found that without performance goals, the metrics that state law requires DEED to report are not useful for measuring program success. Second, broadband grants we reviewed largely met the goals specified in contracts. In addition, we found that DEED did not comply with some state grant oversight and reporting requirements. So I'm going to take a step back now to provide additional information and some context for our key findings, as well as our recommendations for DEED and the legislature. I'll skip past this since Deputy Commissioner Mark Majors has provided an overview, but it is on slide 4 of the handout. For the workforce grants we reviewed, we focused on competitively awarded Pathways to Prosperity grant program and certain legislatively named grant programs. In general, the workforce grants we reviewed, as I mentioned, are aimed at providing employment and training services for Minnesota adults, though the specific type of services varied between grantees. As we describe in more detail in our report, the Pathways to Prosperity program awards competitive grants to nonprofit organizations, local government, local units of government, and other entities. Pathways to Prosperity is aimed at supporting Minnesotans who may face barriers to employment. We describe some example activities funded through the grant program on page 12 of our report. In addition, in recent years, the legislature has assigned DEED responsibility to manage a number of workforce grants that the legislature has directed funding to in law. The legislatively named grants we reviewed fund a wide range of services. We provide some examples of grant-funded activities on page 16 of our report. The Legislative Audit Commission directed OLA to review the extent to which select DEED grants are meeting its stated goals. Minnesota statutes require DEED to collect certain performance metrics for some of the workforce grants we reviewed. These metrics are generally numbers, such as number of participants who enrolled in programs or number of participants who attained a credential. However, the legislature has not directed DEED to establish measurable goals for these programs, and DEED has not done so. As such, we found that the performance metrics that state law requires DEED to report are not useful for measuring program success. As we explain in more detail in the report, the numbers are generally ineffective at measuring program success. For example, it is difficult to determine whether 20 participants completing a training is a success. Additional context would be helpful, such as learning that 60% of training participants completed a training. However, many factors contribute to individuals' ability to complete a program. As such, without measurable goals to compare performance metrics, it is difficult to determine whether a grant program was successful. Even though these programs lack goals, we thought it would be informative to analyze data on program participants that DEED collects for the workforce grants we reviewed. For our analysis, we focused on participants' experience at the time they left their respective programs, which we describe in more detail on page 20 of our report. We also gathered feedback from recent program participants about their experience with the program. Again, we discussed that in more detail on pages 22 to 23 of our report. First, we analyzed outcomes for about 2,600 participants who enrolled in Pathways to Prosperity grant programs in fiscal year 2022 to 2023 grant period. Overall, we found that about 63% of participants who enrolled in the grant period had successful outcomes. More specifically, at the time their enrollment ended, about 29% of participants completed the training and earned a certificate or otherwise completed training objective, and another 27% had new or better employment as a result of participating in the training program. We also analyzed outcomes for over 3,000 adults who enrolled in training programs provided through a legislatively named workforce grant in the same period. Based on our analysis, we found that about 42% of these participants had successful outcomes. More specifically, 21% of participants completed the training and earned a certificate or otherwise completed training objective, and 23% of participants had new or better employment at the time their enrollment ended. And just to provide some anecdotes we heard from participants when we gathered feedback. For example, we heard from a participant that the training helped them obtain a certificate to pursue a nursing degree and change career paths. While we reviewed program participant data to assess participant outcomes, in the absence of goals, we're not able to say whether these outcomes mean that the program was successful. And we can't say if the legislature would determine the outcomes we identified as successful either. As such, we think there are benefits to building on these performance metrics and establishing meaningful and measurable goals for these workforce programs. For example, establishing goals could help the legislature indeed determine the extent to which these programs as a whole are meeting its stated purpose. As such, we offer recommendations to the legislature and DEED. We recommend that the legislature direct DEED to establish measurable performance goals for the workforce grant programs we reviewed. We also recommend that DEED use program data to establish performance goals for these programs. As Deputy Commissioner Mark Majors mentioned, DEED does require grantees to report certain data in relation to the performance metrics we reviewed, and DEED could use that data reported by grantees to identify measurable goals that consider the communities served, the economic environment, and other factors. The legislature also requires DEED to publish a net impact analysis of some of its workforce programs. The net impact analysis is intended to provide information that is different from the performance metrics we just discussed. A net impact analysis compares participants to non-participants to determine whether the program was the cause of certain outcomes or whether those outcomes may have occurred in the absence of the program. For example, while we heard from participants about positive outcomes for them as a result of participating in the training programs, there are many factors that could contribute to these outcomes, such as economic conditions at the time. A net impact analysis, on the other hand, could estimate the effect of the program on participants independent of economic conditions. We found that DEED has not complied with the statutory requirement to analyze the impact of its workforce programs. More specifically, DEED did not complete the most recent mandatory net impact analysis within the required timeframe. DEED last published the report in 2017 as required. The next report was due in 2021. Because an impact analysis can provide more intentional information on the effects of these programs, we recommend that DEED complete the workforce program net impact analysis as required by law. In addition to the workforce grants we reviewed, the Legislative Audit Commission also directed OLA to review broadband grants managed by DEED. As I mentioned previously, statutes direct DEED to manage a number of grants with the intent to support the expansion of broadband service in areas where broadband service is not available or does not meet certain speed thresholds. We focused our evaluation on the border-to-border broadband development grant program, and we described that in more detail on pages 24 to 25 of our report. DEED makes determinations about whether the grant applicants can meet those geographic goals during the application stage. As such, we did not review whether grantees met those goals. Instead, we reviewed the extent to which grantees met some of the goals outlined in the grant contracts, namely locations and state speed goals specified in contracts. We found that the broadband grantees built broadband infrastructure that met goals specified in grant contracts. We describe in more detail deed contracts with a third-party vendor to validate the infrastructure built by the grantee meets the goals established in deed's grant contracts. Based on our review, in general, deed's third-party vendor validated that the grantees in our review built broadband infrastructure to serve locations and state speed goals specified in contracts. Now I'll shift gears to discuss our findings related to deed's oversight of its grant programs. For the purposes of our evaluation, we focused on deed's responsibilities after it awarded a grant, or the active and closeout stage shown on the slide here. As we describe in more detail in our report, after awarding a grant, Office of Grants Management, or OGM policies, require state agencies to monitor grant progress and ensure grantees are using funds appropriately. In addition, when the grant is completed, OGM requires state agencies to evaluate grantee performance. In its oversight role, deed's program division staff also provide a number of supports to deed grantees to help them comply with the requirements in the grant contracts. To answer our research questions, we conducted a survey of deed grantees who received a recent workforce grant or broadband grant. In addition, we reviewed a sample of files to assess deed's compliance with certain OGM requirements. Grantees who responded to our survey generally had favorable opinions about deed's support to them. For example, most survey respondents had favorable opinions about the timeliness, helpfulness, and clarity of deed's communication. At the same time, based on our review of 43 grants, we found that deed did not comply with some OGM oversight policies. First, OGM policies require deed grantees to submit progress reports according to the schedule specified in the contracts. Deed collected only about 1/2 of the required progress reports. In addition, Deed did not collect any progress reports for 4 grants in our review. Second, OGM policies prohibit state agencies from making payments to grantees when they have past due progress reports, and Deed paid at least $5 million to grantees in violation of this policy. Third, OGM policies require state agencies to conduct annual monitoring visits for grants of over $250,000. Deed did not monitor any of its 11 broadband grants of over $250,000 within the first year of the grant in violation of this policy. And finally, Deed did not complete grant closeout evaluations for many of the grants we reviewed, and those that did complete lacked required information. We think that Deed's noncompliance with OGM's oversight policy jeopardizes its ability to effectively manage grantee performance. For example, collecting required progress reports can help Deed promptly detect any issues that grantees may have with meeting grant objectives. As such, we recommend that Deed ensure its program staff comply with all OGM requirements. That concludes my prepared remarks. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I guess before we maybe ask Dee to come back up, is there currently any member questions for the OLA team? I might have one to start with. Again, a lot of the folks, when we look at things, when we're starting to look at either some direct appropriations, we kind of have talked about the 990s here before to kind of understand the status of a nonprofit operation. And again, recently there's been some awareness is brought up to like CEO levels of salaries and things. Are those things that you kind of have looked at during your review of this? Were there any things with any other 990s that have been submitted that seemed like they should have been flagged? Are we as legislators maybe missing important information that we maybe should have or would have caught if we had sort of a better awareness of some of those things? So either one can answer that question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One thing I'll note is that within this specific evaluation, we were focusing on kind of the back half of administration. So this was after the award of a grant. Typically, looking at 990s and that type of financial information will happen at the beginning of the grant process during the selection period. One thing I will note is that I believe it was 2 years ago in 2023 when the legislature passed some greater controls over the financial review that's required at the outset. There were a number of different things that are required to look at. I think that it was, very helpful. 990s were required prior to that, but it did kind of expand the universe of individuals and entities for which that type of equivalent information was required. So I think that that type of information is already kind of covered in current law and policy.
Okay. Any member questions at this point? Seeing none, we'll just have Deed maybe come back up. And again, if you could stay handy. Thank you so much for your report today. If we could have our Deed officials come back up, please. I think, welcome back to the testifying table. Again, we've heard the report, sort of summarizing the full report that everybody has had. I wanted to give Deed the opportunity to maybe focus on some of the questions about, and if you want me to ask you just individually, but again, just some of the why didn't things get completed as are required by law type of questions. If you want me to point them out, Commissioner, I can do that. I'm just curious, as Chair Pinto and I are getting ready to sort of present to these members here some ideas about how we think we can help folks with workforce challenges and help people get to better incomes, better jobs, to help our families, our businesses find employees. We are relying on our partners at Deed to comply by the law. And I think this morning it's a little challenging to hear some of the things that we've just heard. So I want to give, Commissioner Majors a chance to sort of like, again, answer some of these things that were brought up this morning. Would you like me to ask them individually, or do you have a summary to this, Mr. Majors?
Chair Baker, I'll start, and if there's follow-up questions, I'd be glad to answer. How's that sound?
Thank you.
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to thank OLA for providing the report. As you see in the back of the report, that we've actually provided a response and have acknowledged some of the points that they have raised. I think the key one, or the three key ones were, one was around the outcomes, and they're absolutely correct. I think that was kind of the question was being asked of me earlier about outcomes versus measures. And as we've said in the commissioner's response is that, and I think this was also raised by, Representative Schultz, is are we prepared to kind of work with the legislature around developing goals? Absolutely. We can, we'll figure out what that forum looks like and how that comes together, but we are open to doing that. In terms of whether or not grants, I'll speak to the workforce development side, and then my colleague will speak to the broadband side around compliance with monitoring. So when the grants that were reviewed were the grants that were coming out of our during the COVID period. And as you see from the letter from the commissioner, we had experienced during that time, because we were still in a safety space, with our employees, is that we were conducting desk audits and we're not going on site at that time. And so we were also at a time where we were experiencing people were leaving, like every other business operations was happening around the state. We were losing employees and within our division. So for workforce development, there were some situations where we did not meet the OGM requirement. But I can say, as I started this conversation, that's why I was kind of reversed, that we did our presentation reversed. In the last 2 years, we have staffed up quite a bit and to do our monitoring and brought on more monitors, and also have schedules on how we conduct monitoring. We submit monitoring guides to our partners before we even go out to monitor, so we start to work early, provide technical assistance as well. And so we feel like we are in the proper place versus where we were kind of coming out of COVID, and we are moving forward on that. I'm not sure, do you want to add anything on terms of broadband?
Mr. Baudry?
Mr. Chair, members, so on the broadband side, things are a little different. Broadband infrastructure and implementation being beholden to the almighty construction season that we have here. So if an awardee was maybe under contract kind of closer to the fall, butting up against the snow or winter season, that could have impeded their start time, and so maybe there was nothing to monitor. And I mean, around kind of the onset of the pandemic, the first couple years, I mean, I'm sure you've heard plenty about the supply chain issues that were happening, and you know, the fiber installation was no different. So there were a lot of supply chain issues there as well that impacted awardees' ability to put fiber in the ground. But similar to the workforce development side, the team has implemented the 2023 grant evaluation and monitoring changes that were passed into law. And, you know, now we're preparing for BEAD funding, so very much looking to get our ducks in a row here.
And if I may, Mr. Chair,
Commissioner.
just kind of reiterate that our grants we work on a reimbursement process. So it's not like DEED is, you know, giving out advances to all around the state. We receive those invoices and review them against, and I can say definitively that we are receiving our quarterly reports on a regular basis now, and they're coming in. We do look at them on a timely basis. And once again, OGM policy requires us to look at them on an annual basis, and we look at them on a quarterly basis.
Thank you for that. Again, I want to come back to a couple of things, whether it's in COVID, post-COVID, whatever. I think some of the questions here are maybe not as related to that, Commissioner, again, but the second point on this report summary, that at least $5 million were paid out in violation of the OGM policy. Can you help us with that understanding about why would dollars have been sent out against of or not with the Office of Grant Management policy? I think that seems to be a pretty alarming thing, that they would be in violation of the OGM policy. And I wanted to give you a chance to respond to that.
If I may, just
Yes,
one moment.
Mr.
Please.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think this was regarding whether or not this was tied to the progress reports that are done. And I think it says here, DEED paid at least $5 million to grantees with past due progress reports in violation of OGM policy. And so as I acknowledged earlier, that there was a time with the progress reports that may have been not fully looked at during that time. But again, the progress reports are part of what we do to look at when we are looking at payments. Again, we do look at the invoice that's submitted. If there are questions, we look at what's in our Workforce One, which is our CRM, which is where we kind of see if people are enrolled, people are in any activity that they're having, and then the staff does take and kind of compare that. So again, if they see a scenario where an organization, for example, organization is asking for 50% of their funding, but we see zero enrollments, we will not move forward with a payment at that. We would actually go back to that grantee, and I'm giving you an extreme situation there. We would call that grantee up and actually ask them, what is the situation here? Why are you asking for almost 50% of your funds when you have zero enrollments? Please explain that to us and provide us more information. So it's not, I think, you know, so there are a number of steps, I guess is what I'm really saying to you, is that we take to evaluate any payments before they go out, to assess whether or not the information that we're receiving ties into what the work plan is. And again, this was that our policies and practices are different now. And again, they are done on a quarterly basis versus on an annual basis.
Okay. Again, I don't think it was addressing the violation of the OGM policy. You were talking about maybe when you had to make some changes and retract some dollars, or if you didn't have the information, I understand. But I think what I hear you saying is we're a lot better today than we were then, which is just a couple of years ago, which still is, it's very unsettling to folks that, again, have allocated money, very, very limited resources in our tax system to give to these kind of programs if we don't have the department following the procedures and the policies that have been laid out already. So that's a big issue for that. And I'm going to let others kind of get to some other questions here too. But again, only collecting about half of the progress reports too as required. That is extremely challenging. We rely on those measurements to be able to decide where these dollars should go in the future. If we don't have accurate information, if we don't know what the outcomes are and what they've really been evaluated to do and how they're being done, we shouldn't be doing these competitive grants or direct appropriations for certain programs that we have thought for years have been maybe good, solid programs. We can't function effectively to the taxpayers' demands if we don't have good information. So, and again, we rely on the department for this. So again, collecting only half of the progress reports as required by the OGM just, to me, seems like it's very, very short-sighted and what's happening. And when things were not operating well then, and you knowingly fell short of the statutory requirements of giving us that information, was there a letter at the time, Commissioner, that came to the legislators sort of addressing it up front to say, oops, we didn't get this rule done that we were supposed to get done for these reasons? Did that take place at that time, Commissioner?
Mr. Chair, I'm not aware of any letter that may have been sent or not sent. I would have to go back and check and see what the communication was, if any, and we can get back to you.
All right, we're going to follow up on this too. Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Throughout this session, I've spent a lot more time looking at a lot of these state agencies and their compliance, given that there's 3 members on this committee that also sit on the fraud committee. And in large part, DEED has been lauded as being one of the best state agencies in this regard. Yet, you know, I've sat across the table as a manager overseeing employees, and I look at these OLA findings and responses, and specifically your response to finding number 2, and I'm left wondering why there isn't more detail provided to this committee. So again, finding 2, the recommendation was that DEED should complete the workforce program net impact analysis report as required by law, already in law. And that hasn't taken place, and so that is out of tune with the law. So in part, as your manager here, I'm wondering why the only detail that we have in response to you, in response to this finding, is DEED is taking the necessary steps to complete this report with no further detail in your response here. I'm left questioning, as someone who likes to be, as a manager, I like to be collaborative over how you come into compliance and how you get back on track. But this finding, to me, is very concerning. And this response to the finding as well.
Commissioner, did you want to respond to that? I don't know if I heard a question.
Sure. Mr. Chair, Representative Schultz, there's a process that we would have to go through in order to kind of complete this impact report. We have to identify a third party to come in and actually do the evaluation, along with the look at that information. So I think what we were trying to, without going into a whole bunch of what are the steps that are going to take place to do that, we were acknowledging the OLA finding and saying that we were going to come into compliance with the OGM policy. It wasn't to not provide information. It was just, we can tell you, we're going to issue an RFP. We're going to, identify a third party. Like, we could done all that, but just that's why you don't see that kind of information there.
Any follow-up, Representative Schultz?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah. So I can understand that part, and I appreciate it. So I'll kind of go back to in in a moment, I'll go back to the same question that I asked earlier, which is, what are the solutions that you have identified and that you want to present to the committee as to the way that you're going to address these things and help us get true performance metrics for workforce programs, like the ones identified in the report, but more so, if we're moving towards competitive grants, what are those things that you as an agency have identified? And then just, as a point, just so you don't have to come back to me, Mr. Chair, I'll just note that like what I'm seeing in some of these additional OLA recommendations is that some of the reasons that we didn't have compliance is because Governor Walz allowed people to not show up to work. And that is an issue that is a reason why they weren't in compliance with the law.
Your question to the question, I guess, Commissioner. If there was a question earlier? Sorry? Yes.
Yeah, I think, Chair and Representative Schulte, I think, yes, it kind of going back to what Mr. Baldry had mentioned earlier, that we believe like their workforce development grants, there are different services that are being provided. You may provide services on barrier removal. You may provide services on placement. It just depends on outreach. And so we think that this is a bigger conversation, and we think it would be important to talk with our partners as well as the legislature about what those goals look like. And as I mentioned earlier, we would welcome the opportunity to come and meet with a group of folks to talk about what that may look like. But I don't think one size fits all for all workforce development grants, again, because they are providing different services in different populations. So the answer to, I guess, your question is, do I have something right now? No. In terms of recommendations, I think what was offered up is a good start. But I think that we have to do more work together collaboratively to identify what a fair and appropriate performance goals, performance goals look like.
Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you. This has been really helpful. I think taking it out of the political point scoring, most of what we're seeing here is paperwork issues, and I want to talk about actually not the paperwork issues, but the issues that I think were raised here. Representative Schultz, you said as your manager. To me, a lot of what these OLA reports say, like they have a Taylor Swift problem. Hey, me, we are the problem. It's us. Hey, me, I'm the problem. It's me. We haven't, in most of these workforce development programs, actually put the goals, the metrics, and even into statute. A lot of times it's in session law. And I think that there is a real work to be done to say, what are the goals we are trying to accomplish? Who are the people we are trying to help? And what are those metrics? We pass the laws, they implement the laws. And that is the work we could and should be doing. I will say the frustration you hear in my voice is that, we've had the gavel, I think, 5 times, most of which was doing the budget. But we have been here for 2 months, and we have not at all talked about the biggest workforce challenges we are going to have in our state, which is whether it's the tariffs or the funding cuts or whatever it is. But right now, what's happening at the federal level is throwing our economy into a tailspin, and hopefully we don't have unemployment rates that are 10 or 15% like we've seen in the distant past. But when we talk about workforce development grants, we should be talking about the economy as it is and what we are seeing in the next 2 years in the biennium and hopefully in the next 4 or 6. And I think if that's the conversation we can have, my sense is that my side, as we talk about, we already have competitive grant programs. And you know what? We haven't put many goals or metrics into those either. And so, I think we want to do it collaboratively with DEED. I also think that the legislature, we all need to step up and say, what are the workforce goals we have for the next 10 years, the next 5 years? What is the environment that we anticipate our economy being in? And then how do we get there? And that's our job. That's not the OLA's job because they are not your manager. We are. And so just to say that, one of my questions I have to that point is for DEED is do you want to focus us on and give us a sense of where we should be focused as the legislature on really being clear in partnership with you all, in partnership with our stakeholders, whether they are our workforce development organizations, whether they are the city and counties, whether they are the nonprofits, and frankly, the businesses and the workers themselves? Where should we be focusing that conversation in terms of the spending as we're talking about our budget, whether it's competitive grants or not? Are there places you can sort of orient us so that we actually do that work together as a legislature?
Commissioner?
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative. And thank you for your comments around the working together, because I think that's important for us to kind of make sure that we're doing this collaboratively in the same spirit. And you're right, we operate based upon what's given to us and try to implement those practices as well as those metrics. I think in terms of a process, if we're kind of looking forward, we certainly can offer up some proposed goals to this committee to consider, but I think it involves actually having additional conversations with some of our partners in our community-based organizations, our local workforce development boards, to kind of hear from them, because those are the folks who actually are delivering the services on a daily basis and are seeing things that we don't as in government entity. They're experiencing, as you're kind of talking about, we're starting to see more people come into our career force locations as a result of some of the layoffs that are occurring. And we're starting to see more plant closures and so forth. But we also know that there are people with multiple barriers to employment that are actually who are coming through our doors as well. And so, and their needs are different. So I think it's going to be important for us to talk to our partners more in depth to understand really what they're seeing in terms of the needs of the individuals walking through their doors, to give us a sense of what they're dealing with and what can be considered success in that regard. Because sometimes if someone, for example, is coming home from a correctional facility after a long period of time, they're measuring their success is going to be, it's going to take longer, and depending on what it may be, because there may be an integration period. They may need to get a driver's license. They may need to get their certification. Those are all successes, but does that meet the same idea of success for what people would say, well, they didn't get a job? And I would, it could be argued that, yes, those are successes. So I think it's going to take, it's just not a black and white scenario. I think it's going to call for more in-depth conversations moving forward.
Representative Greenman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I really appreciate it, and I think that that's the work. I know that there's lots of us on this committee that have been having this conversation and are committed to doing, and I think from a legislative perspective, one of the best things we can do as we're having this conversation is actually have those conversations with you all and those partners and actually put a long-term workforce development strategy into place. I know you guys do a lot, but as the people who are going to be appropriating and as the people who are making lots of decisions, it feels like we should be a part of this. I'm wondering if, as we think about the next 2 years and we think about what we're seeing just this week, one, what work has DEED done? I know that the standard of the uncertainty, I think, are 76 days into this uncertainty, 77. And two, would you be willing to come back and sort of share with us what we should be thinking about as we will introduce a budget, but we will then be in conference. But it feels like as we think about a biennial budget, we need to make really sure we're protecting Minnesotans and we're focused on Minnesota's economy. And so I'm wondering if DEED would be willing to come back and maybe share with us as we think about the economic forces, the workforce forces, the drivers in the next 2 years, what we should be thinking about, because I don't think we've really done that yet. But I do think before we pass a budget in May, that we should make sure that we are adjusting for those shocks. So I'm wondering if you'd be willing to do that.
Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, Representative, the answer is yes. And to your point, yes, I think we're like most other state agencies grappling with the volatility of what's happening. And yes, so the answer is yes.
Thank you. Anything else?
Thank
Follow
you.
up?
Thank you.
Final?
And I look forward to talking to both of our chairs about that and making sure we have that information. My last follow-up is on something that was raised earlier, which is just about, because I agree, I think when we're using and our public dollars, we want to make sure that we're looking at the organizations or the companies. We want to make sure that they're good stewards, and we want to make sure that the metrics are being met. And we talked a little bit about the metrics. I want to talk about the good stewards, because I know that there is a deep interest in going after some of our nonprofits. I also know that I think DEED funds and provides financing, the angel tax credit, some of our MIF and others, and then we're not even talking about the tax committee, other places, private entities. And I'm wondering if we apply the same rigor to CEOs that we do to nonprofits in terms of organizations, whether they're for or nonprofit, that are getting public funds, and whether we should, I guess.
Mr. Bowdry?
Mr. Chair, Representative Greenman, yes, though, I mean, they of course look different, but I know that our economic development side includes a lot of business subsidy law, a lot of agreements to, within the contract, like say a business is getting funding, you have to meet X amount of jobs created, X amount of jobs retained, at X wages. And if it's the case that, you know, over the period of the contracts, that a business has not substantially complied with that, there are clawback provisions, which do go into effect every so often, and then those provisions, that clawback is prorated with what they actually have completed, so they're not paying the full thing back, but yes, they're on the hook.
All done?
Just final comment.
Final comment, go ahead.
Mr. Chair. I think when we talk about public funds, shouldn't matter if they're going to for-profits or nonprofits. I think we actually need to think about, if we're talking about executive compensation, we should think about executive compensation. So I look forward to that conversation, but there's no reason to treat businesses that frankly usually have much more highly compensated employees than nonprofits any differently. So thank you.
Before I go to I think I've got one more on this list for questions. Again, to Representative Greenman's comments about it is our job to get some kind of that detail and that oversight too. I know the OLA report is asking for the department who really lives this every single day. You need to be able to tell us, we are not here 12 months out of the year. And I think it's important that we are getting that information to make these really good decisions. I've been on this committee for about 10 years, members. This is the first time I've actually seen sort of the levels of unsuccessful outcomes. It's the first time I've really seen that. I think those are good questions for us to understand. That could mean a lot of things. Unsuccessful doesn't mean they're failures. There might be some very good reasons why those participants didn't get the outcomes that they wanted. But this is really important information, so when we start having any group that comes in front of us that is requesting some resources, we need to make sure that we ask, what are the outcomes like? If they're touching 1,000 participants in a 2-year period, what does that mean? Participants it just means a body in a seat, or does it actually mean they got a job? That's a huge difference between one or the other. And our role and what our charge is to make sure that we are spending any resources that are given to us to deploy in a way that is going to help people get jobs, make more money, have better benefits. If we're not getting the dots connected through our Department of Economic Development, then we are failing at our job. And again, the OLA is simply acknowledging we've got some areas to work on. The department needs to make sure that they perform the minimum requirements that is in law to make sure that we have the information to make these decisions. So again, I agree we have work to do. I just know I'm relying on the department an awful lot to get the details worked out so they can present that to us. Because again, as we start rolling out a budget bill soon, I want to know going forward that we are going to have these recommendations and these things are ready to go, because I don't want to be here 5 years from now when we've made decisions this week to that. So Representative Zalesnikar.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the conversation. I just wanted to note that I'm thankful for the broadband success. For the most part, we've seen success in the broadband scope. And when I listened to this presentation, I think what's different in the broadband is that the scope was defined and the constituents let us know. They let me know in the townships when it wasn't happening, why broadband wasn't getting installed in those communities. They made it very clear to the legislators that we've got gaps and here's the problem, and it came back here and we had conversations in this committee and we solved some of those problems so that these broadband we can have the goal, because it's a very measurable goal. You either have it or you don't. And so we're going to see that measurable goal happen. On these workforce grants, from 21 to 22, we had 15.8 million allocated. In 23 to 24, it went up to 33.1 million of allocation. And so to the point of having performance goals, very succinct, we know we have a shortage of workforce. We know that. The employers know that. The measurable goal has to be clear of measuring the job, removing the barriers to get the job, training them, and then having employment follow, and then tracking systems for that. And when that pathway occurs, whether it's manufacturing or healthcare, because I think of a grant from the community I represent, it was very clear. We're going to train through high school programs and partner with the local ambulance, and we're going to train EMTs, and it will be very clear with data. We already are gathering this now. How many people did we employ, and how is that changing Lake County Ambulance's workforce? Because the ambulance is going to be staffed to keep the public safe. And so that's the return on investment. And it's also allowing a pathway into healthcare if they choose to be a physical therapist, a nurse, a CNA, a doctor, or they change careers, but they are in the workforce. So I think we have to have goals, and it has to be that they're in the workforce as the end result, and some type of a tracking mechanism to have that. And I think that that's a very reasonable, manageable thing to do, whether it's however this comes about, to have in mind, because it has happened in the broadband thing, because we can see the actual end goal is services are delivered in that home so that you have broadband, and it's measurable. And I think the goals can be measurable also on the workforce side. So, we have work to do, but I look forward to those partnerships.
Thank you. Anything to this comment, Chair Pinto? Okay, so I think, again, I want to thank Deed for coming forward and the members for this conversation. I want to thank, again, the Office of Legislative Auditors for your work on this. Thank you for sharing this in a way that we haven't maybe really seen in a long, long time. So appreciate that very, very much. Members, we are on for tomorrow morning. I'm going to turn it over to my co-chair, Pinto, for kind of maybe an update as to where things are. Chair Pinto.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I'm not sure how many more folks are watching us at this point, but at least for all of us. There's a chance that we may have a budget bill being rolled out by tomorrow. I'm not quite sure how the timing is going to work, but Chair Baker and I are working very hard. I just want to make sure to tell folks who in fact are watching us still, just as a reminder, that we have not only a $50 million cut target, but also are not unable to touch, to have a net spend out of the Workforce Development Fund account. What that means is that our colleagues in the Senate who've recently reached a budget bill are spending more than $130 million more than we are. So just for folks who are seeing this bill coming out, just recognizing that we are going to be continuing to work very, very hard to get more resources, but the bill that will come out will have $130 million plus deficit compared to the Senate. So we will be very, very squeezed to make really any investments at all. And just kind of want to set that up, set expectations with Chair Baker and me on behalf of all of you. And we will continue to have conversations and roll it out. The plan for tomorrow, assuming not a bill, is to receive both an understanding of the target, but then also to talk about the Workforce Development Fund and understand that in detail, because it's an important source of funding for important work in our committee, and we want to make sure the members are very aware of it. And that's the plan, Chair Baker, and thanks all.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, and as we kind of look at the rest of the week here too, members, we're in our kind of our final week of our regular 8:15 mornings, so you're going to get your mornings back a little bit after this week, after we have our break. Again, I want to thank everybody for that. Again, we'll have lots of testimony likely on like Thursday. Yeah. I want to make sure that, again, folks in the public know that once the bill is sort of released, we'll have a day to kind of look at it, open it up a bit, talk about the details, and then we'll have a full hearing of folks that want to come and tell us how they like the bill or really don't like the bill. And we'll hear folks from all angles. So that's what we're here to do. Likely members, we will be here Friday. That has not been officially set up yet, but just keep an eye on that schedule, because we got to see how much feedback we do get. So it is our requirement to get our bill wrapped up this week and over to the Ways and Means Committee for the next step. So again, I want to publicly thank Chair Pinto for working with us so long. And again, we're still waiting for a couple very important decisions by our leadership on a couple of areas, so we aren't quite there yet. But I feel very grateful to work alongside of you. And so we never stopped working all weekend long. But again, we're not quite there yet, but I think we're very, very close. So anything final, Chair Pinto?
No, Chair, and I share your thanks as well, and we'll continue to work. Thank you.
Members, Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is just relating to the schedule. So talking about Friday, are we kind of anticipating that we'll be kind of in that same window of time that we normally operate from, our 8:15 to 10, or is it a different expectation from what you know?
Sir.
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Baker. Representative Schultz, I know that we have to be done at noon for the legislative break, and yes, I would expect we certainly would push to keep the same. We want to make sure to go early. We know the folks have made plans for the break, and so I would expect that we'd be in the same slot Friday morning. That has not been approved by leadership, but of course, we got to get the bill out, so yeah.
Leadership will have a lot to say about that, just because we all have other calendars to maintain as well. So I think right now, stay tuned. That's what it's looking like. So, members, again, thank you for everything. We've achieved our agenda for today. We are adjourned.